Well, welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield here on the Rural Radio Network. And of course, we have been at Husker Harvest Days. And this is the Thursday that we are recording this program. So it is the final day of the show. It's been great to catch up with a lot of folks and, of course, catch up with a lot of cattle producers. As you can see, Brad Kooima is joining us today. He's with Kooima and Varlick out of Sioux Center, Iowa. And can we call it a struggle bus week, Brad, to kind of just put everything in a nutshell for how this trade has been?
Yeah, well, it's another week where, once again, it's like being at SeaWorld. If you're a cattle feeder, if there's ever something that's going to splash, you're going to be in the middle of it. And of course, earlier in the week where we had that CPI index come out at a big number indicating inflation, even worse than what the expectation had been, sharply lower stock market, cattle futures rolled right along with that train to the downside. And it's taken us the rest of the week here so far to recover. But recover we have, which is... I guess we should be used to it, right? Cattle are impacted by that outside news for sure. But today, I'd say cash is king seems to be the real name of the game today.
As you take a look at the market, let's talk about the South first, because they had 141, 142. Are they just trying to keep up as current on supplies as possible at this point?
Well, I was encouraged finally by something that went on in the South this week, Susan. I haven't said that in a while or very often either. But, while the North was barely steady with a few cattle trading at 43, I don't think a bulk of the cattle have really traded here yet in the North. But, it felt to be like a barely steady kind of a cattle market. The South got 141 last week, and they resolutely passed those steady bids all week this week until this morning. And the trade started to develop at 142 in Kansas, $1 higher. And as that news came out, the futures immediately rallied, and that's really was the catalyst, I think, on the futures market rally today more than anything else. So we talked about, I think, a couple of weeks ago, expecting a narrowing of this spread or difference between what the North was getting and what the South was. And some of that certainly, I think, largely was due to a supply imbalance in the South. And we talked about that, beat that to death. We don't need to go there again, but we are finally catching up, and just anecdotally, when I talk to friends of mine down there, they go, we finally are current. We finally got, through the cattle, and, we'll never be out. But there's a large difference between a little bit too many or a few not enough, right? So, I feel good about the supply end of the market. Of course, we always have to, keep one eye on our back here in case of, China news or, severe recession news. But cattle by themselves are very encouraging to me, Susan.
So we did have a listener question, or viewer question, I should say, coming from here at Husker Harvest Days. And they're wondering, we're getting to mid-September. We got a lot of guys that are weaning calves. But is there going to be some shortened numbers of these calves? Because we saw a lot of cow-calf pairs go to market early.
I don't know how it can be any other way. Cow slaughter year to date is an all-time record. Last year's cow slaughter was the second biggest, only to 2011. The whole ability to hold cattle is predicated on their ability to have feed, right? Now there's still some have-not areas. There's some areas that have a lot of feed across North Dakota, particularly some of the best grass conditions they've maybe ever had. Montana's spotty, but a lot of it's pretty good. South Dakota is better than it's been in the last couple of years. Nebraska certainly has got some tough spots, and you're seeing some calves move early, even already out of that area. I think the difference the last short term anyway, Susan, is in the South. About 4 weeks ago, we finally caught a big rain in Texas, and it was like flipping a switch. Beef cow slaughter anyway, dropped off 12 to 15%, and it stayed that way now for the last 4 weeks. 12 to 15% is a big deal in terms of the overall supply of cattle moving or meat moving into the channel. But to your question, I don't know how there cannot be less calves to pick from. And even more importantly, I would think that the females, if you're in an area where you've had a little bit of grass and have some feed, I would certainly think that you'd be anxious to hold some heifers back for replacements, or at least slow down on this cow liquidation. So, I feel bad for people that have experienced that back-to-back drought years and haven't been able to maintain their cow herd. The reaction to that on the end of it, of course, is probably higher prices when you don't have as many cows around. That's the kind of the sad truth of it.
So last week when we talked, we were talking about box beef. Even though the numbers weren't as what people wanted, they were better than what we saw at Mother's Day. How are we sitting box beef trade as we head into the end of the week?
Well, we've had a little sell-off since the last time you and I have talked. Box is now around 253 and a half, a couple of dollars less than we were back there in May. Not uncommon. This is kind of that end of summer doldrums. Kids are in school, yada yada. We're not going anywhere. We're not going out to eat, supposedly. I am told though that there is recurrent good long-term demand domestically, and I think from an export standpoint, the data last week again, we were a net exporter. So I mean, there's it always could be better. We could always import less for sure. But generally the demand side of this thing has held up pretty well, I think. As we go into the fourth quarter, I'll try to keep an eye out for all of us here as to, does the retailer dare to reach out here and get some more meat bought going into that fourth quarter, or is he going to be a little more hand to mouth, worried about potentially recessionary fears? At this point, I don't really see anything that makes me feel like to expect any big glitches on demand. I think the Packers still got a nice margin, and I think the cattle thing's still in pretty nice shape.
All right, sounds good. Well, we appreciate all your thoughts this week, and we'll catch up with you next week at a different location.
Good luck. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. As we always remind folks, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss not suitable to all investors. And that's been this week's Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.